Good evening. So glad you could join us for another Wednesday night study. Tonight we're going to talk about a question I heard a long time ago. I was on the road. I think I was traveling to a lectureship, and I was listening to a religious station as I was passing through this particular area. And there was a question that was asked the preacher. I have no idea who he was or who he was associated with or any of that, but he seemed to have some pretty good answers for some of these tough questions. He seemed like he knew what he was talking about. But one of the questions he was asked was from a guy who said, quote, "This isn't so much a question as it is a question I get asked a lot, and I don't have a good answer for it. People always ask, how can God allow people to be punished for an eternity based on what we do for just a short period of time here on earth? It doesn't really seem fair. If people were given more time, they could change. If they were allowed to see the end results, they could change. It doesn't really seem like God is very fair by condemning people based on such a short time on earth." Now, I've heard that question before. Maybe you have as well. Maybe it's not that exact question. It's something more to the effect of, how can God punish people with hell, which is really, 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 really bad, based upon what they've done on earth, which are these minor transgressions? The question is usually formed in some way where what God is doing, the punishment we get in the afterlife, what God is destining us for, is way worse than what we've done now. Somehow they just don't weigh up, right? They don't match up. One is just a lot heavier than the other. How can God do that, right? And I wanted to take a few moments tonight just to talk about some of the ideas behind this. So to discuss this, we'll use an example from the military. I like to use those examples because they're familiar to me. It's been said that when you join the military and you begin your training, when you first go into that boot camp, you go through three very distinct phases. The first phase is ignorance and innocence. You have no idea what you're getting into. You have no clue. You don't know what it's all about. You don't know what you're supposed to do or what you're not supposed to do. You don't know what it's going to be. You're going into it totally blind. And so you go into it both innocent and ignorant. But eventually you start to figure things out and you get into the second phase, which is the robot phase. The robot phase is where you just do what you're told. You might not know why you're doing it. You might not understand any of it. But you learn to do it and don't ask questions. Just do what they tell you to do because they're yelling and screaming at you. And if you do it wrong, you're going to get in trouble. So just do it. Just be the robot they want you to be. The final phase is when you do understand things. It's when you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together. For all the barking and the yelling that the drill sergeants do by the end of the training, eventually it stops getting to you because you know what they're doing. You know what they're all about. You know why they're yelling at you. And you've sort of grown to a point that is beyond their reach. You understand things. You've got the skills to do what you need to do, and you know why you're doing them. All of a sudden, things are making sense. You might agree or disagree with it. You might not like why, but at least you understand. And you start making your own decisions. You start forming your own opinions on things. Well, this is exactly like life in general, right? When we come into this world, we are innocent and we are ignorant. We're completely ignorant of what's going to happen ahead of us in the rest of our life. And we're totally innocent. As children, as we grow up beyond being just those innocent, ignorant babies, we get to be children, and now we just do what our parents are told, what our parents tell us to, right? We go into that robot phase. We learn rules. We learn guidelines to live by. We don't necessarily understand why. Sometimes mom and dad tell us because I told you so, and we're like, that doesn't make sense. I don't like that answer, but we're just doing it, right? Eventually, we do start to understand things. We start to make the connections. We start to make our own decisions, right? We've now matured to a point where we're starting to take control of our own lives. But what kind of decisions are we making? Now that we can take control of our own lives, now that we're seeking out the why. Why do I have to do this? Why should I do this? Why should I not do that? Am I going to actually do or not do that? When we start making those decisions, we got to ask ourselves, what kind of decisions are we making? And what sort of attitude do we have towards those decisions. The Russian novelist Dostoevsky, he wrote a story about a woman who died, and she found herself in hell. And she believed it was a mistake, and she thought she didn't belong there, and she was crying out loudly, saying that it was all wrong. This is all wrong. I don't belong here. This isn't the place for me. And so Peter comes down, and he allows her to make her case. He says, all right, why don't you belong here? Convince me otherwise. And she thinks about it and finally says, well, this one time there was a beggar, and the beggar came to my door for food, and I gave him a carrot. And Peter checks his records, and he says, well, yeah, you did do that. Yes, you did. So, tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to lower the carrot on a string down into hell where you are. You grab onto it, and I'm going to pull you up. And so down comes the carrot, and she grabs it, and she starts to be lifted up out of hell. But then all the people around her see what's happening. And they think, hey, I want to get out of here too. So they grab onto her feet. And more people start grabbing her. Pull me up, lift me up. Everybody wants to get out of there, and everybody's grabbing onto her. And she's struggling against him, and finally she lets out this scream and says, let go of me. This is my carrot. And just at that moment, the string breaks, and she falls back into hell. Dostoevsky's point was that this is precisely why she belonged there in the first place, because of her attitude. It was the fact that her entire worldview revolved around her. Everything was about what I have done for you, what I can do for you, what I should or should not do for you. And it was just her. It was a me attitude. And everything was about me and mine. Once we've matured beyond the robot phase and we start making our own decisions for our own lives, what are the decisions based upon? Why are we doing the things that we're doing? Why are we choosing the things we choose? Is it what we want? Or is it what Christ wants? That's really the point of it. Is it what I want to do? Is it me, myself, and I? Or is it about Christ? Are we truly seeking the kingdom of God, or are we just going through the motions and pretending at righteousness? Or are we outright rejecting God? At the end of basic training, we had soldiers that were ready to be soldiers. They had completed their training. They had the skills to do what they needed to do. They were ready to rise up and do it. There were others who didn't have that attitude. They didn't like it. They wanted out. One of them, I remember, actually told our drill sergeant, said, you just need to kick me out of the Army right now, because if you don't, I'm going to go to my unit, I'm going to do a bunch of drugs, and I'll get kicked out there. One way or the other, I'm getting kicked out. So why don't you just save us all a lot of trouble? Do it now. He had no idea what life was like in the Army after basic training. And he really didn't care. He just wanted out. His mind was made up. And the reality is, life is very different after you leave the training. Once you leave your basic training, that's not the real Army. Basic training is not the real Army. It gets way better. But none of us knew what it would be like. None of us could tell exactly what came next. But some were ready regardless of what it was like. Some were saying, yes, I've got a duty and I don't know what comes next, but I'm going to do it. I'm ready to do it. Let me do it. And others say, I really don't care. I'm not giving it a chance. I don't want it. I want no part of it. Can you tell who are the good soldiers versus the bad soldiers? Can you tell who belongs in the Army versus who doesn't, based upon the attitude? In Luke 16, we have the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. And the rich man, he wants to go back and to warn his brothers what's going to happen if they don't change their ways. He says, somebody's got to tell them, I'm in a bad place. I want to go back and let them know. But in verses 30 and 31, it says, and he said, no, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. He said to him, if they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead. Here in our time on earth, we have the tools to find Christ. We have the tools to find the truth. We have everything that we need. And that's not to say that it's not going to be harder for some people than others. There are others who come to Christ much later in life. There are others who have to work a little bit harder to find their way to the truth. But ultimately, what is our attitude through it all? Once we've reached that age of accountability, once we have passed beyond being that robot, and we're now responsible for our own future, once we've sort of gotten through those phases and we've sorted through those things, and we're now responsible for our own future, for making our own decisions, are we seeking our own pleasure? Are we seeking our own enjoyment? Or are we looking for something else? Are we looking for God? Are we looking for Christ? Are we looking for the truth? Are we looking for heaven? How much time do we really need to find Christ? Our time here on earth is a lot like basic training. Are we using the things that we've been given to prepare to be the best we can? Or are we just outright rejecting it all? Taking on the attitude, well, I'm going to get my own while I can get my own. And I'll figure out what's next when we get there. When I cross that bridge. You know, that attitude really doesn't go away. We can see this sort of thing with the Apostle Paul. Paul was a bad guy, right? He was the worst of the worst back when he was Saul, back when he was persecuting and killing Christians. He was putting Christians to death, but why was he doing that? Well, it's because he was dedicated to God, right? He thought he was doing the right thing for God. And then he saw the truth. He saw the truth and his mind was changed, and he did this complete 180. All of a sudden he changed everything he was doing. When he was killing Christians to the time he was thrown in jail for Christ, he all the time had a God-seeking attitude. Even though they're completely different things, he was seeking God first through it all. And by contrast, we have the Pharisees. Well, they sat and they debated with Jesus himself. They were right there debating with him. And they couldn't be persuaded. Why not? They didn't want to be persuaded. They weren't seeking that. That was never their intention to begin with. They were selfish. They were egotistical. They were so set in what they thought and what they wanted, there was nothing that was going to change their mind. See, there's a difference of attitude. Even when Saul is killing Christians, he has a better attitude than the Pharisees do, because with his attitude, he can be changed. And he can keep on seeking God and be dedicated to God, but now he can do it in the right way. The Pharisees can't. They can't be changed. They just are who they are, and they want what they want. How much time do you really need to change that kind of attitude? Another 100 years? Another 200 years? Most likely, never. Most likely that never happens. Is it fair for God to do this? Is it fair for God to judge us based upon 80 years-ish here on earth? Absolutely. Absolutely. People say, well, no, if we had 1,000 years, we could be different. If we had 2,000 or 10,000 or 1,000,000, we could be different. We could change our way. It's not fair that God could punish us based upon this short little 80 years that we have here. Well, if I wanted to be a brain surgeon, and I went to a hospital to get a position there, I went to say, hey, I want to be a brain surgeon here with you guys. One of the first things they're going to do is want to know, where did I get my degree from? Where'd you go to med school? Oh, I didn't actually go to med school. So, you have no idea how to do this job? Well, no, maybe I don't know how to do the job, but given enough time, I will know how to do the job. Given enough time, I'm going to figure out. I'm a really smart guy. I can study the textbooks. I can study the manuals. Just give me the job. I'll be fine here in about 20 years. I'll be good, right? Is that going to fly? Is anyone going to hire me for that? Does any hospital want that person working for them? Maybe I can do the job. Maybe I've already studied the manuals. I've studied the journals, and I know everything there is to know about how to do that job perfectly. Maybe I'm the best brain surgeon that there ever could be, but I never actually went to the school to get the degree. I have no one to vouch for me. I have no one to say, oh yeah, he can definitely do the job. He has been trained. I have no one to say he put in the time, he put in the study, he put in the work, he's a perfect candidate. Do you think I'm going to get a job? Even if I'm the best that there's ever been? No. Same thing with the soldier. What sort of soldier are you when you leave boot camp with those different attitudes? If we pore over the Bible, if we understand it inside and out, but we don't have Jesus there to vouch for us, are we going to go to heaven? If we study ethics and we study morality, and we put all of our effort into learning those things, but we don't have Jesus there to vouch for us, are we going to get into heaven? How sad if we get to Judgment Day and Jesus says, well, it appears that this guy knows what he's talking about and he lives the life that I taught, but I have no idea who he is. How sad. What is your attitude? What is your attitude in this life? What are you seeking in this life? And who do you have to vouch for you? Are you willing to do what's right in God's eyes? Or are you doing what's right in your own eyes? Are you willing to put in the time and the effort demanded of us by Christ? And most importantly, do you have Christ there to vouch for you? I hope you'll think about these things. Take these things seriously. Investigate them. There are some people in this world who simply do not care and do not want the truth. Period. There are other people who are desperately seeking for that truth. And then there are some people who, they're just sort of wishy-washy in the middle. What sort of person are you? What is your attitude? Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Hope to see you again on Sunday. And I hope all of you are safe this week. Have a great week.